Russia is playing politics with its gas, and I think that Canada needs to recognize this. The fact that we have now issued a time-limited quote-unquote exemption for the sanctions on that turbine sets a very dangerous precedent.
Hi, and welcome to another episode of the Expert Series. In this installment, the CDA Institute spoke with CDA Institute fellow Marcus Kolga. Kolga provides his analysis and opinions on recent developments surrounding the war in Ukraine. We discussed the efficacy of Russia's disinformation campaign, Russia's weaponization of hunger, and how Canada can better support Ukrainian farmers, strengthen relations with the Baltic states, and continue being a strong NATO and Ukrainian ally. Kolga also provides his take on Canada's decision to return the Nord Stream 1 turbine, as well as the challenges that lay ahead this winter for Europe amidst the ongoing war, energy supplies, and the rising cost of living. Hi, Marcus. Thanks for joining me again. Always good to talk to you. To kick off, Canada is posting full-time ambassadors in the Baltics, Estonia, Lithuania, Armenia, and Slovakia. What opportunities do you think this might represent for Canada, particularly regarding Estonia? Do you think there is potential there for possible further diversification of Canadian trade?
Yeah, I absolutely believe there's a whole ton of opportunity in the Baltic states, all three of them, not just Estonia, but Latvia and Lithuania as well. And I think most Canadians, when they think of the Baltic states, they probably think of, fairly small nations that we probably, if you look at them individually, we don't do all that much trade with them. But if you put them together as a whole, I took a look at the numbers just a couple of weeks ago, and our exports to all three Baltic states total about $500 million annually. And that's a pretty significant number. It ranks them in the sort of the top 15, 20 trade partners that we have. In fact, we do more trade with the Baltic states than we even do with Russia. So, I think that's, if that's the baseline that we're starting from, Canada just last year appointed a trade commissioner to Tallinn. So we're only now starting to sort of explore the opportunities that might exist in the Baltic states. And so far, we've sold a lot of our technology. We've sold a number of Canadian-built Airbuses to the Baltic region, but there's a lot more that we could be doing. And certainly on the Baltic side, there's a lot more that we could be doing with, for example, Estonia. Estonia is a leader in IT, certainly in e-governance. Their largest IT company, Nortel, not to be mixed up with Nortel, but Nortal, just set up offices here in Canada. And I think there's a lot that we could learn from Nortel, as far as our own government and our move to digitize government is concerned. Estonia, in all three Baltic states, there are also, of course, significant energy concerns. So Estonia and Canada, there's a company in Ontario that Estonia has partnered with to look into the possibility of building small modular nuclear reactors. Estonia is looking at this to get themselves off the Russian electricity grid, and the Latvians and Lithuanians are also looking to build small nuclear reactors. So this is an area where we can certainly work with all three Baltic states. And of course, during the past 5 months, during the war with Ukraine, gas has become a serious issue. And just like many other European nations, I think that the Baltic states are looking to Canada as a possible source of future liquefied natural gas. Lithuania already I would say about 5-6 years ago, installed an offshore LNG terminal to wean themselves off of Russian gas. Right now, they're buying most of their gas from the Middle East and other sources, but they'd also like to source some of that gas from Canada. And Estonia just announced that last month that they would be building their own offshore LNG terminal. And I've spoken to them in the past about this issue, and Estonian officials have also said that they'd like to look to Canada to source some of their gas from us because it's safe and reliable versus Russian gas. So there are a ton of opportunities in the Baltic states, and so having this an ambassador in Lithuania, full-time ambassador in Lithuania and Estonia, hopefully we'll be able to explore some of those and grow that bilateral trade with all three Baltic states.
I'm wondering if we can get into the topic of Russia's targeting of Ukrainian agricultural infrastructure. How is Russia going about this, and are there any ways Canada could better support Ukrainian farmers?
Well, I think starting back in February and March, with Russia's invasion of certainly eastern and northern Ukraine, the invasion, the campaign against Kiev. There were a lot of farms that were targeted on the way by Russian forces. Right now we're still seeing Ukrainian farmers, that are finding landmines, unexploded munitions, whether it's bombs or artillery shells on their fields. So, if we just look at the farmers themselves, there's a real risk there that they face every day when they're working their fields. Beyond that, there's about 20 million tons of grain right now that is stuck in Ukraine in various different ports and different silos and such, and Ukraine is unable to export this to the world. 10% of the world's grain comes from Ukraine, and much of northern Africa, Egypt, Libya, they rely almost entirely on grains that are harvested in Ukraine, and there's a real concern right now that there will be a shortage in the coming months and year, and there are concerns about potential famine. And in fact, the UN has warned about this repeatedly. And so what Russia has been doing, they recognizing this fact, is that they've basically decided to hold Ukrainian grain hostage in order to extract concessions from the West, lifting of sanctions. And so how they're doing this is that first of all, they've blockaded most of the ports in southern Ukraine. Odessa is a primary primary hub for Ukrainian grains to export them out to the world, and the Russian blockade of that port is obviously preventing any of that grain getting to market. Over the past month or two, we've also seen Russian forces target agricultural infrastructure, whether these are silos and such, in southern Ukraine and elsewhere. And we know that in eastern Ukraine, Russia has been stealing grain supplies and has been selling them to countries that are friendly with Russia, primarily Syria. And so, it's a growing problem. It's something that I think the Western world needs to pay much, much closer attention to. And quite frankly, we need to start thinking of ways, if we want to get that grain to market. And this is last year's grain, I should mention. We need to start thinking about how we can escort some of those ships from Odessa out into the Black Sea and into the Mediterranean to protect them and ensure that grain gets to where it needs to go. The other problem is that the spring crop of wheat the harvest is coming up in the next couple of weeks. And the problem is that the silos in Ukraine are already full. So there's concern that farmers are going to they're just going to burn the crops because they can't harvest them. They can't keep them anywhere. There's no point in harvesting them and having them rot somewhere. So we're running into that problem as well. And one of the things that Ukraine is looking at right now is basically writing off this year's crop and looking towards next year. And if that's the case, we're going to run into serious food a serious crisis with regards to food in Africa and elsewhere. So it's a serious problem, and it's one that the West needs to start looking at much more closely.
Switching gears a little now, I'm wondering if you can provide your assessment of the efficacy of Russia's disinformation campaign in Ukraine.
I think that broadly it's failed if we're looking at the Western world. We started out at the end of February with this apparent campaign to denazify a small operation to denazify Ukraine. Vladimir Putin tried to convince his own people in the Western world that Ukraine was a country run by a Nazi regime. Its president, Volodymyr Zelensky, is, of course, Jewish by heritage. And, I think that narrative and that effort really fell flat. That's not to say that it hasn't worked in certain quarters. I think that, from my research and my observations of various different platforms here in Canada and elsewhere, on the far left and on the far right, those narratives about Ukraine being run by Nazis, that there are Nazi militias running around all over Ukraine, they do resonate with certain elements, like I said, certainly on the far left and on the far right. And one of the more curious sort of aspects that I've noticed in that information operation is that a lot of the groups, specifically here in Canada, that over the past, I would say, year and a half, 2 years, have been promoting sort of vaccine hesitancy, anti-lockdown narratives and such. Those groups that I've been monitoring, at the end of February, when Russia invaded Ukraine, the narratives on their social media feeds all of a sudden switched to ones that were very, aggressively anti-Ukrainian and very pro-Russian. And that sort of continued up until about a month ago. And I would say that, from the research that we've done, that up to, I would say 30%, 40% of the messaging that was posted by those groups on social media was anti-Ukrainian. And so, that's not to say that the Russian government was controlling any of these groups or any of these accounts, but that there was a certain alignment there with these anti-vaccination and anti-lockdown groups. And there was a natural fit with the Russian government. Other sort of narratives that the Russians have been engaging in are ones that are attempting to deter Canadian volunteers from going to Ukraine and joining in the defense of Ukraine. There was a story about a sniper about a couple of months ago. Walid was the sniper's name, and this was an actual former Canadian Forces sniper who had joined the voluntary defense of Ukraine, and he traveled there, I think in March or something like that. And Russian social media platforms, shortly after he left, posted some news about him that he had been actually killed some 20 minutes after arriving in Ukraine, that he'd been shot, and that he had been Canada's deadliest sniper in Afghanistan, something to that regard. And these stories circulated on Russian social media. They emerged on, Western English-speaking social media a little bit later. And about a week after the story initially appeared, this Walid resurfaced. He had been on the front lines and away from social media, and he basically posted, these stories about me are false. Here I am, I'm alive, and sort of posted a selfie of himself. And the narrative about him being some sort of Canada's deadliest or one of the world's deadliest snipers were also false. That narrative was intended to sort of blow up Walid's profile, so that the Russians could use him to sort of try and scare off and deter anyone else from leaving Canada and volunteering to join the Ukrainian Defense Forces. And there's another similar situation that emerged, I would say about 3 or 4 weeks ago. Mark McKinnon from the Globe reported on it, where the Russian Ministry of Defense claimed that 162 Canadians had been killed in Ukraine during the war. They claimed that these were all volunteers who had joined the Ukrainian forces, but there's no indication that that some Canadians may have been injured during that time. But there's no evidence that any Canadians have been killed in Ukraine during this past time. And then there are other narratives as well that Russian state media are trying to promote. They're trying to use the inflation and the rising price of energy and gas. They're blaming Canada and NATO for supporting Ukraine and for prolonging the war. So they're trying to erode Canadian support for Ukraine using that narrative. And then there's always the classic blame NATO narrative. The Russian state media is trying to suggest that it's NATO's fault that this war is happening at all, and that Canadian and allied support for Ukraine are prolonging it and is causing suffering for the Ukrainians. So, those narratives are floating about, and Russia is constantly developing new ones to try and erode Western and Canadian support for Ukraine. And it's something that we need to certainly keep an eye on. But I don't see those narratives and Russian disinformation having any sort of serious impact on Canada's approach to the war in Ukraine right now.
The US seems to be supportive of our recent decision to return the Nord Stream 1 turbine. Ukraine, understandably, a little more critical. What do you make of this decision, and how do you think it impacts perception of Canada?
I mean, that's a great question. I think, quite honestly, that Canada has fallen victim to Russia's energy blackmail. The story, of course, is that about 3 to 4 weeks ago, Russia reduced the flow of gas flowing from Russia to Germany in the Nord Stream 1 pipeline. This is, of course, the pipeline that carries Russian gas all the way from the far north, from Yamal down through the St. Petersburg area, and then the Nord Stream pipeline goes undersea underneath the Baltic and connects Russia with Germany. And so Russia has reduced the flow in that pipeline by about 60% over the past number of weeks. And what they've said, because obviously Russia's European customers have complained about the reduction in that flow, and they blamed Canada. They blamed Canadian sanctions. They've claimed that a turbine that is used to compress the gas that goes into the pipeline, it's been undergoing some sort of repairs just outside of Montreal at a plant owned by Siemens, the German manufacturer. And they've claimed, because of the sanctions and our sanctions on Russia, which prevent us from exporting various goods, including technology, that those sanctions have prevented us from returning, or from Siemens from returning, that turbine to Germany and onto Russia. And Russia is claiming that this has caused the dramatic drop in the export of gas. I've done some research on this. I just wrote a piece for the Toronto Star that will be coming out in the next few days on this issue, and this is completely false. First of all, there are at least 8 compressors that are used to push the gas through the Nord Stream pipeline. So the absence of one turbine certainly, mathematically, it does not account and should not account for. It cannot account for the 60% drop in the flow of gas through the pipeline. The second is that Russian gas, even if the Nord Stream pipeline were to shut down completely, there are pipelines that exist that connect Russia with Europe, that transit Poland and Ukraine. And so any suggestion that Germany may be cut off completely from gas because of the this one single turbine that's missing is nonsense. I mean, it's not possible. Russia could divert that gas through other means, and so this playing politics with gas, weaponizing gas. This has been a tactic that Russia has used for quite some time. It's used it against Ukraine for the past, on and off over the past 15 years or so. When Ukraine has done something that the Russians don't like, they just turn off the gas. Russia has done that over the past 5 months now during the Ukrainian war. It's turned off gas to Poland. It's threatened to turn off gas to the Baltic states, to Finland. Anyone that's been critical of the war has been subjected to this. So Russia is playing politics with its gas, and I think that Canada needs to recognize this. The fact that we have now issued a time-limited, quote-unquote, exemption for the sanctions on that turbine, I think it's dangerous. It sets a very dangerous precedent on other sanctions. It may signal a return to business as usual in a normalization of the situation. That's that's not something that I think that we've intended to do. And I think it undermines Canada's own foreign policy, our security policy, certainly our sanctions policy, and our policy towards Ukraine, and it undermines the credibility of our sanctions regime. So I do hope that Canada will reverse its decision. You mentioned that the United States supported our decision to grant that exemption. I think they needed to. I think the United States is doing all that it can to maintain unity amongst NATO partners. But I also think that Canada's decision will raise eyebrows amongst many of our allies within NATO. So I think, quite frankly, Canada would be better off just revoking this certificate and this exemption on this turbine, and simply asking the German government to, if there's a problem with the turbines, you fix it yourself, and maintain the sanctity of our sanctions and preserve our credibility on them.
Is it possible that Putin could be given strategic advantage or concessions this winter, given many are predicting a severe energy crisis in Europe? Or do you think perhaps it's still possible that in the summer and fall months, NATO could still inflict considerable enough damage on Putin's army to the extent that Russia may accept a ceasefire?
I strongly believe that NATO needs to do all that it can over the next 4 or 5 months to arm the Ukrainians, to make sure that they have a fighting chance, not just to stop Putin right now in eastern Ukraine, but to push back Putin's forces back to the February 24th line. I think that if we want to stop Vladimir Putin, and I genuinely believe that everyone in NATO wants to stop him, clearly Ukraine wants to stop him, we need to hand him a strategic defeat, and that would be it. This is what our goal should be: is pushing back and restoring Ukraine's borders before February 24th. If we fail to do that, I am concerned that some European nations, depending on the severity of the coming winter, may be open to some concessions. They may try to pressure Ukraine into accepting some of those losses that they've had, whether it's in southern Ukraine or eastern Ukraine. And I think that this is something that should be completely unacceptable to most NATO states, because if we start conceding even an inch of territory to Vladimir Putin in this current conflict, my fear, and I know it's a lot of other officials in Eastern Europe and experts fear this as well, is that that'll only embolden Vladimir Putin. So he may not strike elsewhere immediately, because we know that his forces have been depleted. He's going into warehouses, pulling out tanks that really belong in museums. Tanks from World War II, from the Cold War, that are being put on the front lines, and so he may not attack or challenge any Eastern European states in the near term. But if we do concede this territory, it demonstrates that we may not stand up in other places, whether that's Moldova or Lithuania, Poland, where between Poland and Kaliningrad in the Suwalki Gap, maybe Estonia, Latvia, perhaps Finland. And so we need to make sure that we do, like I said, we do all that we can to ensure that Ukraine has the weapons and the resources to stand up to Putin right now, to stop him from making any further advances, and if possible to push him back. It's so critical that we do that, because I do fear that if the conflict continues past the winter, then we might see the West, certain European states, conceding something to Putin. We don't know what comes after Putin at this point. I think that Vladimir Putin will continue this war so long as he is in power. He needs to now demonstrate to his own people that he's made some sort of advances, whether that's in the south of Ukraine or eastern Ukraine. He may well, there is a possibility that he may stop at Donbass. I think, if he's receiving truthful and factual information, he may recognize that he cannot go any further, so he may stop. I don't think that in the broader term, in the long term, I don't think that we'll see peace in Europe so long as Vladimir Putin is alive. Even if he were to stop in Donbass tomorrow, he will try somewhere else again in the winter or in the spring. We've seen that he has a voracious appetite for conflict. This has been ongoing since 2000 with the Chechen War, but really, internationally in 2007, he first tried to destabilize Estonia with an ethnic rioting that was organized by the Russian embassy then. Of course, in 2008, we saw what happened in Georgia, and it's been ongoing ever since. And there's no reason for anyone to reasonably believe that he will stop while he's in power. And so I think our real hope should be that that there are plans being made somewhere in Moscow for an eventual change in leadership. Ideally, the Russian people themselves will rise up and demand change and democratic change. And I think it's only at that time when Russia does finally and truly embrace democracy, it's only then that we'll see true peace in Europe. That's not going to happen, like I said, until Vladimir Putin is gone. I think that Canada needs to stand pat on where it's at with regards to sanctions. I think we need to continue working with our allies to, number one, ensure that those lethal defensive weapons get to Ukraine, and we also need to make sure that we stick with our commitments when it comes to Latvia, because deterrence really is the key here. Deterring future aggression. Vladimir Putin will seek any sort of advantage where he can find it, and where the cost is too high, he won't engage in that sort of behavior again. So making sure that we impose costs and consequences on Putin along with our allies, that's critical, and we need to keep doing that so long as he's there.